Hello, welcome back to another video of CS106A, assignment 5 for Yahtzee. And basically what we're going to do is work on creating the game. There's no milestones here, so I'll separate it by parts depending on the methods. Some of the methods are easy, so I'll group them together, but I'll put it in the description box so you know which ones I go over. Before we actually go into doing the actual programming, we're going to go to the flowchart here. Okay. So here I did the assignment already, and this is my solution to the assignment. You're going to get an implementation of constants. Basically, that's just going to be this bar right here, where you have all the values for all the things that you need for the actual program. Number of players, number of dice being rolled, application height, width, number of categories that are total, number of categories that are actually scored, what the categories are. Okay, and to use that in our Yahtzee program, we use the code implements so that we can actually use those constants without actually having to create an instance of that class, because it's not really a class. Rather, it's just where we get our values of our variables from. Now, it's still a graphics program here, and you'll see that there's going to be a graphic. They've already created something called Yahtzee display. A Yahtzee display is something that's already given to you. What you also need to know is that there are methods that go with that Yahtzee display that you definitely need to know what they do, okay? And I might go into some of them, but not really too much, something that you need to read on your own. Again, with how the game works, I'm not going to go into how the game actually works, so something that you would want to read before you start um, watching this video. So again, I'll explain my logic and I'll explain why I do certain things, and basically, let's follow. Just listen up. Okay. Okay. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to kind of get an idea of what you want, or how do you want the game to actually work. Okay. So the way the game should work. Let's open up our flowchart. Is you want to be able to initialize the game. Run the game sequence, okay, which is going to be the whole Yahtzee thing. Now, the first thing that happens in Yahtzee is you're going to get, how many players, the player names, and that's going to be all taken care of by the display. After that, you get into the first person's initial roll. Okay, so this is where you get the first roll. We create a method for that handles that first roll, and then you need to handle changing the dice and re-rolling. That would be a different method. You don't want to group it up in one method because that would make it too large for you to really handle. Okay, remember, you want to be able to break things apart into smaller methods so that you can modify things without having to change whole groups of coding, right? So we have the first dice roll, and then we have another method that handles the second and third roll. We also have a method that after you finish your rolls, handles the selection of the category. And of course, when you select the category, you want to check to see if that category is a valid category to pick. If it's not valid, then what's going to end up happening is that it's going to return a 0. But if it is valid, it will return the appropriate number for the category you picked. Check special categories. That will be for the bottom half of the score sheet. Top half, pretty easy. Those are just numbers added up. Bottom half has to do more with certain configurations, full house, or if it's a 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind, or if it's going to be something like a small straight, big straight. Calculate category is the thing that's going to handle with putting the scores into the actual chart. Total up results is going to be the method that handles adding everything together, and of course, after everything is totaled up, another method that handles the winner of the game. You can easily pause this video and look at the information again before you start. Kind of take this very slowly. What we're going to do first is we're going to create our play game and start first dice roll and our second and third roll in this video of part 1. So let's go ahead and take a look at our class. So here is the play game method. Okay. Again, you want to think about it in terms of top down. Go general. Okay. So the first thing that we really need if we want to play the game is we need a set of dices. Notice how that's not given to you here in the private variables, so we want to add that. And since you've been learning a lot about arrays and array lists, this is where you're going to implement those arrays and the concept of arrays, array lists. Now, the one thing about array lists, if you're using the the object version of it, you need to make sure you import this package, java.util.star. That's the one that will handle the array list, the ones where the objects can be mutable. Mutable meaning you can switch them out, add, remove, replace, all that stuff. Okay, so, but for the dice, even though we're going to put that in an array list, we don't need to put it into the array list with the capital L, because we have a fixed number of dice. We know that you can only roll 5 dice at a time. So knowing that, we're going to create an array. Okay, this is one way of creating an array, something called dice roll. And to construct it, you complete it by saying new int and the number of dice, which is going to be 5. Now you could put 5, but the computer science way of doing it really should be using the public static final int variable value, because you can always adjust it. You can make another version of this game where it uses 6 dice, or 7, or 9, or 10, and you don't have to change, the number here and everywhere else. You could just change that number here, and that would change everything else. So we want to create that flexibility. Okay. All right. So we created that private int dice roll. So now we have an array list. So literally 5 integer wrapped boxes that holds integer values. Okay. The next thing that we want to develop is the scorecard. Okay, we need to have a running total of the values that are being put into our scorecard. So we're going to create a private int. This time it's going to be double brackets, and we'll call that scorecard. New. And we don't want to generate the dimension of the scorecard yet. The reason for it is because we don't know how many players there are in the game until we actually run our program. See, notice how here it's going to ask for how many players there are, who the players are. So again, to initialize the dimensions, we're going to initialize that in the playGame. So here we're going to put scorecard equals to those new dimensions. And what are those dimensions? Well, it's rows by columns. So rows will be our, well, let's take a look. Rows will be our categories, and the columns will represent each person. Okay, and remember, just like any initialized array list or any initialized value, it's going to initialize as 0. All right, so row 1 is really row 0, then it's row 1, row 2, row 3. Same thing for columns. It's not going to be column 1, it's going to be column 0, column 1, column 2, column 3. Except this is not going to be there. Column 0 will start off with the actual player 1. Okay. So, new int, and we're going to go ahead and put the categories. So, how many categories are there? There are a total of 17 categories. And we need the number of players, and where are we going to get that? That's easy, because now that we calculated our number of players and put it in variable n players, you can say n players, n players equals to the number of players, like that. Okay. The next thing we want to do is now create our loops that will run through the game. Since it's turn-based, meaning first person, second person, first person, second person, the easiest way to do this is going to be a for loop. Okay, that will handle that. So we'll call for into turns, and we'll start with 0. Okay, so turns, as long as turns is less than the number of categories there are, because you can only have 13 total rolls, since there's only 13 categories. Oh, by the way, I put n categories, but it really should be n scoring categories. There's a total of 13 n scoring categories. N categories includes the spaces where you total up the numbers, but we're not going to take a turn for that because there is no dice rolling during that part, right? And then here, we're going to say turns plus plus. The next thing you want to do is now, not only are you dealing with the number of turns there are, which is going to be 13, you have to do it for each player. So create a loop for, and this time we're going to calculate for players. So for player is equal to 0, player is less than the number of players, and then players player plus plus. Okay, and there is a little bit of a problem here. All right, and let me explain. One thing you need to realize, we initialized the player as 0. Okay, so the player value of 0, let's say it's Eric. Okay, he would be represented by the variable int of 0. And let's say the second person is Jenny. Jenny would be represented as the variable value int of 1. Okay, why is that a problem? Because when we get into the Yahtzee display class and how that's been created, you'll notice in the actual documentation that they represent players not as 0 and 1, but rather as 1 and onwards. Okay, so player 1, as you can see here, will be 1. Player 2 will be 2. Player 3 will be 3. Okay, and you can see that right here in the update scorecard when you actually put in the player values. So that could be a little bit of a problem there. So here, in order to fix that problem, not having to deal with it, we're going to go ahead and go with the same value. So counting from player 1, player is equal to 1, as long as player is less than or equal to 2, and player is player plus plus. So instead of starting off with 0 as the int index, we're going to start off with 1, so it matches up with our Yahtzee display. It might have taken you a while to figure that out, but I'm just letting you know now that there's that incongruency there. Okay, so we create the loop for the turns, create the loop for the players in those turns. Now we gotta create the gameplay. Okay, so the first thing that's gonna happen is, again, looking at our flowchart, we want to initialize our dice roll. So start first dice roll, and who's going to be rolling the dice? We got to put a parameter, so it's going to be the player. Player 1 is going to be rolling that dice. Okay, and then let's create the stub for that. So private void start first dice roll, and we'll take the value of player in our program. After we do the first dice roll, that same player is going to do their second and third. So we're going to put second and third roll, and again, it would be that player. Now, do I need to put player in this case? You could, but you don't have to. And actually, I don't use any parameter in that third method. Rather, that third method is that second and third roll is just something that would be able to calculate on its own, and you'll see that soon. But you really do need it for the first dice roll for some functionality, and I'll show you why. But you won't need to re-implement it into the second method. Again, I'll show you why. So let's create the stub for that. Private void second and third roll. Oops, I spaced it for some reason. Okay, so once you do that, once you get your second roll, and it's the end of the turn for that player, what do you want to do then? Have them select the category they want to put it in, right? And of course, it's directed to the player, so whoever the player is, they select the category, and it's going to update that score sheet, right? That's what you want it to do. Now, that happens 13 times for both players. So what happens after all those turns are up? Well, now we want to be able to total up the results, okay? And then after we total up the results, we also want to go ahead and calculate the winner of this game, okay? And as you can see, going top bottom, you get a clear picture of how the game works. Of course, it took a little time for me to map it on a separate sheet of paper, but as you can see, you can literally just program the whole thing straight out right there. Okay, all you gotta do is fill in the blanks for what the method's actually gonna do. But as long as you know what they are gonna do, you're gonna have a breeze filling out this assignment. Okay, so moving on. So now that we know what the game's going to do, we need to fill in our blanks for our start first dice roll and our second and third roll. I know usually I would put the stubs for the other methods, but I'm going to do that when we actually have to do that in parts 2 and 3. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is when we want to start the roll, we want to implement a Yahtzee display method. What method is that? Well, let's take a look. So, because we're using the graphical interface, we want to use this button right here, wait for player to click roll. Because when the player clicks the roll, it will highlight that person's name. So before the person clicks roll, it will highlight the person's turn. You want that, okay? And that's what makes it different. So we're gonna put display dot wait for player to click. Okay, and again, player is the integer value, and that's why we have that parameter, so it knows that it's talking about player 1. See how that matchup happens? You don't want to have that incongruency there, and it's going to cause you a lot of trouble if you don't fix that early. Okay, just like that NASA experiment where they sent the Mars rover, people in Europe did everything in the SI units, people in America did everything by the foot system, and you can see that those two don't relate. The metrics in the foot system caused a $1 billion disaster. Or I don't know if it's a billion, I know it's definitely hundreds of $1 million, but anyways, you don't want that mistake. Next, what you want to do is be able to roll those dice, the dice, 5 times, right? So after the player clicks the roll button, you want to actually roll those dice. So we're going to call a for loop, because we know we're going to do it 5 times, int dice starting with 0. This time 0 works because our array for the dice roll is going to start off with 0. And then dice, as long as that is less than the number of dice in our game, which is going to be 5, dice plus plus, we're going to have this for loop work 5 times. Okay. Then what you want to do is randomly create an integer value for each of those spaces. So dice roll, this is how you call the array, and then the value of dice is going to be 0 first, so you're plug in 0, is equal to rgen dot, we're going to use a random generator to generate our random value, a number that's on a dice, which is 1 to 6. Okay? And it's going to do it 5 times. Right? Now once you generate your your array of numbers for those dice, then we need to be able to display that on our graphical interface. To do that, we call another Yahtzee display method called display dice. Display dice will display our array of dice. So our array is dice roll. We put that in there, and it's going to display those little dice count things. And that's all you got to do. So for the first dice roll, wait for the player to click, wait for the actual random generated rolls happen, and then display those results on the screen. Okay. Now the only other thing that you want to do is, because the program actually has some print text at the bottom that says, whose turn it is and stuff, you gotta also put that in so that it can help you debug the program if you end up having any kind of problems. So that's what I would highly suggest. So let's go ahead and stick that in. We'll put it right here. We'll put display, and that method for that is going to be called print message. And so the message is going to be a string, so we want to put player's name. Now where do you get the player's name? I didn't talk about that. Well, lucky for us, Yahtzee display also stores player names. Not only does it store the number of players, they also store the players' names. So you look at the top, you'll see that it's an array string of player names. And so the one thing you have to remember though, this array string will also index from 0 as well. So be careful with that when you actually put it in. So print message, when you want to get the player's name, you're going to put player's name, and then you're going to put the index of the player, And because this is based on the Yahtzee display, we have to subtract it by 1. Okay, so you get that 0 index, okay, for that player's name. Then we hit plus. And what do we want to add? Well, we want to add the rest of the text. So that would be, let's say Eric's turn, okay, and we're going to put click, and then how do you create quotation marks? Well, front slash like that, okay? So roll dice, front slash, and then button to roll the dice. Okay? So that is our print message that we're going to have printed on the bottom when the whole application starts. And it's going to start our whole first dice roll sequence. Okay? Now, let's get into the second method. The second method here is second and third roll. Now, when you want to build the second and third roll, you have to remember, what do you want to do? Well, looking at our little diagram here, after the first roll, what do you want it to say on the bottom? You want it to say, select the dice you wish to re-roll and click roll again. Okay, so the message first. So we're going to put display, print the message. Again, you don't have to do that first. I just like to because it gives you like a sense of a reference of kind of like where to like get your stuff in. If there's stuff that happens before or after it, you can always modify that. You just need to have your algorithms down on paper first so you can, mess around with it later. So here, select the dice you wish to re-roll and click roll again. And again, if you have problems with those quotation marks, forward slash should fix that problem. Okay? Roll again, period. Semicolon. Okay, so after you display that message, what do we need to do? We need to be able to wait for the player to actually click on those dice. Okay, because the graphical interface will detect those clicks. So when you directly click on the dice, it will turn dark blue. I mean, it would contrast to the opposite colors. And so that is simply called display dot wait for player to select the dice. Like that. Okay, so once the player selects the dice, we want to check to see which dice have been selected. And if they've been selected, what are we going to do? Re-roll those dice. Okay, so it's going to be a for loop again, and we're going to go through all 5 of them again because we don't know which ones are going to be valid or not. So we're going to check it by checking each one to see which ones are valid. So let me show you how that works. Int dice. Again, starts out from 0 because of the index. Dice is less than the number of dice. Dice plus plus. And then what we're going to do is check that whole condition statement. So if our display shows that the dice is selected, okay, so if it's true, if it shows that the index is 0, dice has been selected by us, then we want to re-roll it. So dice roll, which is the method of where we hold the dice values of that index, which if it's 0 will be 0, we'll get a new value. Okay, and that value will go from 1 to 6, just like a normal 6-sided dice. Okay, and once we do that, once it goes through all 5 dice to see which ones have been selected or not, then we want it to display those results. So display dice, and what's our array called? It's called dice roll. Okay, now that's for the second time. First time is like this, second time is like that. So the cool thing about that is that the second time and the third time are pretty much the same. So I can really just copy and paste this. Now we want to distinguish the difference between the first and the second, so make sure you put some comments here. I didn't talk about commentary, but commentary is very important here. So we call this the second roll, and we'll call this the third roll. This is really for yourself, so you have an organization, kind of sense of organization with your actual programming. Once you have the third roll in, I don't think there's anything that's different about the second one. Let's see, you print a message to re-roll and click. You wait for the player to select the dice. You check to see which ones have been changed, and then you display the results. So I think, yeah, they're the exact same steps. Technically, I could have used a for loop to do this twice, but I mean, since it's only twice, I just copied it over. If it had been like 3, 4, 5, I probably would have put the whole thing inside another for loop, but because it's twice, not a big deal. And so that's how you roll the game. Let's quickly run it, and to check it, I'm going to go ahead and put those in comments. Now running the game, it's going to ask me for the player's name, so let's say Kai, and then Kai2, and there you go, Kai2. Notice how this is highlighted. So this is going to show the first person's turn. And the prints on the bottom, Kai's turn, click roll dice to roll the dice. There's the dice, and then select the dice you want to change. See how it actually detects your clicks. Roll again. Okay, it rolled again, and do it one more time. Perfect. So basically that's how you write the methods for that. Please like and subscribe if you have any questions about how I did the algorithm. If you have your own algorithm and you have some questions about that too, please leave that in the comments, and hope to see you in part 2.